So, I've decided to do an update on everything. Not because I think my life is so important or anything, but just because for a while, I think certain people found value in my journey and just the things that I've learned. So the first update is about me quitting my job at Intuit. Why did I do it? So I talked previously about it, but I felt like there's details I left on the table and things that I could expand on. So for those unfamiliar, I worked there for about 2 years before I finally quit in May of 2022. And while I was searching for this job, I had unrealistically high expectations for it. I expected that working there, or really any big tech software company, would fix all my problems. I was expecting to learn a lot about technology, I was expecting to make new friends, and I was expecting to enjoy office amenities. And to an extent, I got most of those things. The managers and the coworkers I had while working there, they were some of the best people I've worked with in my life. The office amenities were indeed very, very nice. And I just learned a ton about how software works at scale. Just seeing how 1,000 people work on a single web application and all develop on it is already impressive enough. And also seeing an application where you see scales in the millions of users is quite jarring. And I learned a lot about regression testing and analytics and all this stuff that I didn't learn at startups. But despite all that, I was missing the main thing that I fell in love with software engineering in the first place. I fell in love with this profession because above all else, I loved creating things. A perfect day of work for me would be getting assigned a task and then just sitting down, working through it throughout the whole day, designing the whole process, and then submitting the code at the end of the day. Those things are what brings me the most joy. So the first and main reason I quit my job there was because at big tech companies, you really don't work on that much code. Instead, the code that your team controls is this tiny little gear amidst thousands and thousands of other gears at the company that is just insignificant in the grand scheme of things. My typical workday became much more about solving high-level people problems rather than technical problems. Here's an example of the day in the life. Usually, I would get assigned to figure out something about our code base. And well, there's probably a dependency on another team. So in turn, I would talk to their team about what needs to be changed and what dependency with our code base needs to be changed. And this usually led to just a long chain where I'm redirected from team to team, telling me that the problem is somewhere else over and over and over again until the answer is found. And this also usually meant attending hours and hours of meetings with like project managers, developers, etc., etc. And for some people with the right personality, this job is probably a dream. This is kind of actually what project managers do. But for me, I struggle with social anxiety. And even more than that, I don't know how to participate in office politics. This made the whole situation just an absolute nightmare for me. And honestly, thinking back, a lot of this probably had to do with the fact that I mostly worked at small startups before this company. In small startups, you're familiar with pretty much all aspects of the code base, and generally, you work alone. Constantly meeting with stakeholders over and over again became most of my job. And then slowly and silently, I began to burn out without really even realizing it and being in constant denial of it. Another reason I quit my job was that I struggled with the remote work landscape. I never quite fully adjusted to working remotely until very recently. And I always felt like it was difficult to get into a sense of rhythm without a set schedule every day. You know, like wake up, go to the gym, drive to work, drive home, etc. And at the time, it was also difficult because I derived a lot of my friendships and social connections from the people that I worked with every day. Not being able to see these people every day meant that my social connection, my friends, it was all cut off. I did later realize that making friends at work is a slightly flawed way of thinking, but I'll cover that later. And these two main reasons combined prompted me to finally quit my job. And it was definitely a scary experience. I quit my job without any job prospects lined up. And obviously it was a massive risk, but at the time it was really the only option I saw. Overall though, I regret nothing about my time at Intuit. It taught me so much, I met so many great people, and it gave me most of the things I was looking for when I joined the company. They also treat their employees very well, and I am eternally grateful for that. All I can say was that it was a bad fit for me personally. The question that I'm sure is on top of mind is, what am I doing now? Did I leave software? Well, the update is that after quitting my job, I did find another job shortly after. It really was the most perfect timing I could have possibly asked for. Because after I quit my job, I didn't even go to the on-site interview for my new job yet. On the second to last day of work at Intuit, I went to my virtual on-site interview at this new company. I talked to the CEO of the startup on the last day of work at Intuit. And then 1 week later, I received my offer to work at this company. All that is a pretty nice segue into my next update, which is my new job. Honestly, it is pretty much everything I could have wanted and hoped for in a job. I work for a small to mid-sized remote startup, and so far, I love almost everything about it. I love the people here and the culture and how supportive people are in technical problems. But more than anything, just being able to work on code, develop new features, ship things to production all the time, and work just very deeply on technical problems is something that I had missed so dearly. It reminded me why I love this career and why I got into all this in the first place. I do just enjoy being challenged every day and learning something new on the job. And I've definitely realized for me that a mid-sized company provides the perfect balance between the corporate lifestyle of a big company and the fast-paced, ridiculous nature of a tiny startup. I am working on code all the time, but I don't feel pressure to ship like low quality code for the sake of speed or appeasing a customer or anything. And I don't feel like the environment is overly political where you need to rub shoulders with the right people in order to get ahead in the company or anything like that. For me, it's the best of both worlds. But although I am very content with my job, I wouldn't say that I find myself at peak happiness. Because really, I think that what I've learned is peak happiness doesn't exist. I am happy with my job, but I do look towards a future one day where I can move away from tech completely. The tech industry, it can sometimes feel like a time loop where you're just running into the same problems like over and over and over again. And a large portion of that stress is the intense passion and competition between software engineers. For some people, this profession is all encompassing. For me, this profession was all encompassing for a while. You'll read blogs about new technologies, you'll take Udemy courses about the newest technologies online at night, you'll study LeetCode, you'll talk tech news with your friends and your coworkers. There is a sense of pressure to study and talk about tech all the time when you're in this industry. And this mindset, it's obviously amazing if you want to start your own company or if you want to network. But at this point, having tech as 100% of my life just isn't a priority anymore. I've spent a large portion of my career looking for the peak and just hopping from one job to another, searching for that. At each job, I think about the core aspects that I'm unhappy about. And when I move to a new job, I'm hoping that those problems will go away or be fixed. I remember there was a time when I would idealize the future of working in software. While I was studying LeetCode or whatever, I was thinking of a future where I'd be working at, say, Microsoft. I would think about all the things like moving to a new city, walking into a new office, talking to a new team, working on new technologies, enjoying office amenities, commuting back to a small studio I had in the city or something. This was the ideal future that I was looking for when I was studying. And none of that really made any sense. I've come to realize that this is just a job, and there was no point in me romanticizing it to this extent. So in summary about my current job, I'm content. I love being remote, and it helps me focus on just my work and my coding and my hobbies. And with being remote, it forced me to finally fully adapt to the remote working lifestyle. And it helped me finally move away from trying to make friendships at work, and instead working to build relationships with people outside of work, which actually is a great segue into the next update, my personal life. So I mentioned earlier how trying to use the workplace to make friends is an extremely flawed way of thinking, at least for me. And here's a long version of why I think that's the case. Okay, making friends at work, it always seemed like the obvious path. For me, it was just like a natural progression. You know, in school for the first 16 years of your life, making friends is pretty easy. You just sit next to someone in class, you join a club, and it's pretty easy to strike up a conversation. You can talk and bond over having shared interests because, I mean, you're in the same class, the same club. You're bound to have something in common. But in the workplace, it was never quite the same. As you might know, I struggle with social anxiety. But despite that, in my first few years of my career, making friends at work actually worked out pretty well for me. I just found a bunch of people at work my age that I could relate to, talk to, share ideas with. And luckily for me, they all had way better social skills than me and were way better at reaching out to make the friendships happen. And I started to feel really comfortable with hanging out with them at lunch and sometimes even outside of work. But after time passed, I realized that being close to your coworkers can sometimes harm your business relationship and vice versa. It's hard to give constructive criticism to someone at work without worrying about it disrupting your personal friendship. And similarly, it's hard to maintain a work relationship if something happens to your outside of work relationship. And on top of all this, everything became much harder to maintain once the COVID-19 pandemic hit and everyone was working remotely. I was locked up in my room the whole time, and I felt like my life was falling apart. See, at the time, all the people that I had considered to be my friends were my coworkers. I had made no effort to make friends outside of work. And it was during this time that I wasn't spending face-to-face time with them at work that I realized that we just didn't have that much in common besides work. We had no shared interests or hobbies. We'd just been brought together by circumstance, by this job. We had tech, but did I really want to talk about software and tech all week and all weekend? It made me realize that this just isn't the key to finding meaningful, long-lasting relationships. It can work, of course, but it didn't for me. And since leaving my job at Intuit, I focused on keeping my work and personal lives as separate as possible. And instead, I focused in investing on my personal relationships outside of work, whether it's old friends, mutual friends, or just people I haven't reached out to in a long time. It's been a much more fulfilling and long-lasting experience overall for me. And in terms of my side projects, I'm still heavily focused on video creation, motion graphics, etc. It's still one of my greatest passions in life, just creating things for the sake of creating them. And hopefully, I'll have more to share in the future. And I suppose with that, there is one last update I should address: YouTube and the stresses of content creation. So first, I think it makes sense to cover why I started content creation in the first place. I've been following YouTube creators since 2006, basically when nobody took the platform seriously. For me, I followed all the Asian YouTubers back then, like Nigahiga, Kev Jumba, Wong Fu Productions, because I couldn't find any Asian American role models in American television or movies. And because of that, I built a deep connection to all of these creators on YouTube. But all that time, I never once imagined myself making content. I was always too shy, too awkward, too lazy, too busy. But creating things or artistic expression, it was always something that I enjoyed very deeply. I just didn't have an outlet for it. In high school, I dabbled in photography and photo editing. But after a while, I just lost interest. Many different times in my life, I tried to learn how to draw so I could make these amazing artistic creations I see people make, but I just couldn't do it. And I lost interest there too. And after a while, I figured maybe I'm just not meant for creative pursuits. Maybe, I'm just left-brained or whatever. But in the start of 2021, I found myself desperately searching for a hobby or really just anything to replace this void in my life that was left by software engineering interviews, LeetCode, etc. For so long, studying software engineering interview questions was such a core part of my identity that once I got my job and I didn't have to do it anymore, I just felt lost for a while. I would just find myself lying in bed after work, not knowing what to do with my life, not knowing how to make friends while everyone's trapped at home, not having a hobby. But it was during this time alone at home that I stumbled upon the idea of video creation, but not to make YouTube videos, to just capture my life, my memories, in a way that I can experience them forever. And this was something that I could finally, truly get into. My goal was just to capture everything with my phone, my time spent with friends, my vacations, and just be able to chop them up into videos so that I could revisit them as slices of life later in the future. So I spent about 6 to 8 months learning how to edit video, how to shoot video, how to do lighting, how to do sound, all this stuff just because I liked it. And about 6 to 8 months later after doing this, I realized that, wait, I feel like I have some stories to share with other people. Stories of things that I've struggled with in my life and my career. And I could do that with videos and YouTube, this platform that I loved and used for so long. Content creation gave me a lot of my purpose back. It gave me the hobby, the passion that I always wanted, that I always needed in my life. And in the beginning, I was deeply passionate about the things I wanted to talk about. At the time, I felt that even if literally 0 people viewed my videos, I would still be happy that I created it and put it out there for someone to watch. Stories about the mistakes I made with LeetCode, stories about my job search, my frustrations in software, my struggles with social anxiety and shyness. These were things that I figured out earlier in life, but when I was figuring it out, I was alone. I wanted someone, a past version of myself, to feel less alone. And it seemed like my stories were resonating. But after a while, it became stressful to rely only on my personal stories and experiences. It became stressful to come up with new ideas, and I started blanking out when it came time to write a new script. And it became stressful to get caught up in numbers and analytics. And eventually, I lost sight of what I was doing in the first place. I lost sight of what I was here for, which was to help people. I tried to branch my content away from being about myself to being about different topics that I was interested in, like tech, news, questions for the tech industry. But I was never as passionate for these things as I was before. I've realized now that I need to make the videos for myself, the videos that I would love. On YouTube, there's just so many things going on. There's so many different types of content, niches, personalities. It's so easy to get caught up in trends or compare yourself to other people. I've realized now that finding my place is telling the stories that I want to talk about, just because I want to talk about them. And those stories are about my culture, about my experiences. I know some of the people watching this channel are truly passionate about my journey, and I would want to thank those people from the bottom of my heart. I am still passionate about content creation and about telling these stories, but only about stories that I feel like need to be told. And if I have nothing, then I'll just wait until there is something before I create it.